Welcome. My name is Joshua Foust. I am a fellow with the American Security Project, and I also edit a Central Asia blog called Registan.net. I'm here speaking with a guy named Adalat, who edits a news service in Turkmenistan. So, Adalat, welcome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, good evening, and thanks. Well, as you said, my name is Adalat. I come from Turkmenistan, but now have to live outside the country because of political reasons. And I'm a man in my early 30s. And as you mentioned, I run this Alternative Turkmenistan News project. It's an online newsletter. I collect news articles from a bunch of websites that are dedicated to Turkmenistan and that cover issues like human rights and similar things. So I collect these articles, I compile them into one file, and send this file once a week to about 3,000 people inside Turkmenistan.
Adalat is not your real name, correct?
Yes, that's true. I cannot really reveal my name because even though the government suspects that I'm the person who might be doing this, I still prefer not to tell my real name because of the negative consequences that my far relatives can face in Turkmenistan.
So that actually provides a good pivot point then to talk a little bit about Turkmenistan. So if most people have even heard of the country, and I'd wager that most really haven't, they might know something either quirky about the dictators who run it or the fact that it has a lot of energy. So why don't you tell us a couple of basic facts about Turkmenistan?
Sure. Well, it's a newly independent country. Until 1991, it was part of the Soviet Union. It was the most southern country of the big land called Soviet Union. In 1991, we gained independence, and our first president, who was also known as the Great Turkmenbashi, ruled until 2006. He was re-elected many times, or he thinks he was re-elected. And in 2006 he passed away and was succeeded by another man who many people thought that he would ease the regime a little bit, but that never happened. And his name is Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov. He is now in power. He served his first term of 5 years, and now he's in his second term. He just was re-elected this past February with an exceeding number of more than 87%.
Now, when a president, or ruler, I guess is a better way of putting it, wins by something like 87%, that means that the vote was completely fraudulent.
97%, yes.
97, yes. And this is actually common in most of Central Asia, with the exception of Kyrgyzstan, where they actually have held competitive elections. All of the other tyrants in the region, in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and obviously Turkmenistan, all of the rulers of those countries have been elected by impossibly large margins. Just last year, actually, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who runs Kazakhstan, was elected, I think, with 95% of the vote, something outrageous like that. This new guy, Berry Muhammadov, does the same thing. He basically fixes his own elections.
Yes. Well, once you mentioned Kazakhstan, I must say that I have a lot of friends from Kazakhstan. I lived in the country for a while, and I've met a lot of people, and many of them actually, I shouldn't say, and I wouldn't say that most of them or all of them, but many of them think that Nazarbayev deserves this presidency, because at least they say he shares with the people, with all the wealth that the country has. At least they enjoy basic freedoms like traveling with no restrictions outside the country, or opening up a business, or going overseas in pursuit of higher education. You name it. They enjoy these basic freedoms, and they say it's sufficient for them.
And in Turkmenistan, people don't have those same basic freedoms.
No, absolutely not. Any sphere of life you take, be that communication, be that freedom of expression. In fact, as our viewers are looking at the video, they can see all of the newspapers that I put together here, and you can see all of them. On all of them, there is one face of one man. Today he does this. Today he's sitting behind his desk, ridiculing his ministers. There he shows a new city that he's basically approving the new buildings or new fountains, new constructions, new parks even. There he stands at the UN General Assembly speaking. So, in other words, it's all about him. It's all about him in the media. The same thing with traveling abroad. You may have heard about the case that happened 2 years and 2.5 years ago with nearly 150 students in Turkmenistan who went home for their summer vacation, summer break, and never returned because the government decided not to let them go because they thought that the place where they studied, and that was Kyrgyzstan, the American University in Central Asia, they thought that it's a bad place. They teach them how to organize revolutions, how to participate in revolutions, etc.
So that brings up an interesting point. The previous ruler of Turkmenistan, Turkmenbashi, the father of all Turkmen, in a lot of ways, for lack of a better word, his megalomania, the way that he would name months of the year after family members, he would make everything in his name, he would build all of these huge monuments to himself. That kind of distracted the international community from really paying attention to the serious human rights abuses in Turkmenistan. Now that the new president, Berdi Muhammadov, is doing the same thing, do you think he's accomplishing the same kind of distraction, that all of these huge expressions of narcissism are actually distracting the international community from looking at the abuses that his regime perpetrates?
It's difficult to say. They are completely different people. Niyazov was an orphan. All of his relatives died in the earthquake of 1946 that happened in Ashgabat. And he had a strong policy of, he rejected clanship. If some government official wanted to hire his brother or his wife or his uncle, he would say, "Stop! Don't do that. You cannot do that." Basically, but this new guy, has a lot of relatives. He has, I think, 4 sisters and a brother, or he's alone only son in his family, and they are taking everything. Businesses. They're taking over businesses. They're taking over all of the lucrative, businesses and other things that just bring money. They take over everything. They hire. You need to pay them a lot of money to get a position somewhere. It's all controlled by them.
It's interesting. The country in Central Asia that probably gets the most public outcry for its rights abuses is Uzbekistan, which borders Turkmenistan. It's just to the east of them. And one of the features of that abuse there is actually the way that Uzbekistan's the way that the dictator's family, the way that Islam Karimov's family essentially dominates the business community there, steals from everyone. In 2005, the State Department pretty famously called Gulnara Karimova, who's the president's daughter, the most hated person in the country because she acts like such a thug. So do you see that then happening, that same idea, that same process happening in Turkmenistan?
Absolutely. It's if in Uzbekistan it's daughters, in Turkmenistan's case it's sisters and nephews. Nephews are taking over everything, even the most popular bars, let's say. Or there was a very nice hotel in Ashgabat called Nisa, which was just recently built, in late 90s or so. So the new guy decided to demolish the whole building and build a new hotel on its place. Why? Why would he do that? Because the new owners now are his nephews.
And it's funny you bring that up because I think I want to say it's the Hotel Intercontinental, but I might be mistaken on that, in Tashkent, in the capital of Uzbekistan, just got, I think, decertified from being associated with that chain.
Yeah.
because basically the Karimov family or one of their cronies had run it into the ground. I'm probably forgetting one part of that story, and people will yell at me about it later, but that's that's okay. So I'm curious if you could maybe help brainstorm a little bit about this, at least in terms of people who pay attention to human rights. The abuses inside Uzbekistan are really well known. People know about slave labor in the cotton fields. They know about things like the Andozan massacre in 2005. They know about how political dissidents get abducted and tortured to death. But a lot of the same kinds of abuses that happen in Turkmenistan don't receive the same amount of attention. Do you have any thoughts on why that could be the case?
Who could be the case?
On why Turkmenistan doesn't get as much attention?
Well, as you said, the cotton slavery, we had that with the first president. Luckily, and thanks God, the second president decided not to continue with this anymore because, as many businesses, cotton businesses or clothes manufacturers, they discontinue buying Uzbek cotton, for instance. He also knows that, our guy knows that, and he decided not to continue with this. But in place of children, in place of school students or university students, it's the teachers who go there, They have to spend weeks on cotton fields, and there's virtually no one to replace them. And therefore, the children also have to miss classes. Yes, in Uzbekistan, the reason why the Uzbek case receives more attention in the West in terms of human rights abuses than Turkmenistan. Well, my assumption would be that Uzbekistan doesn't have so many natural resources or natural reserves, oil, gas. Yes, they have gas, and I think they're selling it to China as well. And but Turkmenistan has a lot of it. Turkmenistan is sitting on the fourth place, I think, in the world in terms of gas reserves. And the leadership, previous leadership and the current leadership, are always promising to sell the gas to Europe, to build this trans-Afghan pipeline to deliver gas to India and Pakistan. And I think the West just lives with these promises, and that's the reason why the words and the rhetoric in general in the West is much softer in regard with Turkmenistan than with Uzbekistan. That could be my assumption.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's interesting because energy is kind of the only thing that Turkmenistan makes, in a way. I mean, that's insulting, I know, to some other things that they do, like making, I guess, carpets and stuff. But really, when the West looks at Turkmenistan, what they see is gas. And this trans-Afghan pipeline you're talking about, it's called TAPI, for the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. And people have been trying to build that since, I think, the 90s.
Yes.
I want to say when Unocal and Brightus, which is an Argentinian firm, were trying to get both Turkmenistan and then also the Taliban, and I think Benazir Bhutto was running Pakistan at the time, to get all of them to agree to run a pipeline south from Turkmenistan. In the interim, though, Turkmenistan, and part of the reason they were doing that is because Turkmenistan sells most of its gas to Russia. I mean, the overwhelming majority of it in the 90s all went north into Russia. People were trying to come up with a different way of getting it out of the region. But Turkmenistan found someone else to sell gas to that wasn't Unocal, even though they're not really interested anymore, and it's not Russia. So who else is buying Central Asia's energy resources?
Well, now China is getting big on this because the Chinese have money. They have a lot of money, let's say, and on the other side, they don't care about human rights. So the Turkmen government, I would speak on behalf of Turkmen government. They decide to sell gas to China because that's the best partner in their eyes. They have money and they don't care about human rights.
Also, an enormous pipeline now stretching across the entire region.
Yes, and instead of getting cash money for the gas we sell, we receive very cheap and very unreliable netbooks children in school, and we get all of those buses that run in the city, and the buses that break after a month of running without air conditioner, without anything.
That's awful. So part of what's shaping up these days in Central Asia is something a lot of people refer to as kind of a new great game. And that's phrasing I'm really not a fan of because it draws attention to the old imperialist powers in the 19th century. But there is a contest of sorts between the United States, Russia, and China for influence and for having some sort of say in the affairs of these countries in Central Asia. But Turkmenistan, previously at least, has practiced this really intense neutrality, where they've tried very hard not to take anyone's side and to play as low-key a role in the region as possible. Could you tell me a little bit about that, about how Turkmenistan is positioning itself, both in regards to its neighbors and then also with the bigger powers from the outside?
Well, Turkmenistan is a closed society, I should say that. It's closed, it's literally closed from other countries. It has visa policy with every country in the world, I think, except Turkey. And that's just because Turkey decided to cancel entry visas for all Turkic-speaking countries. So, the relationships of Turkmenistan with its immediate neighbors are tough. Let's say Azerbaijan. There are a couple of oil fields in the Caspian Sea, which the two countries are, well, not yet fighting about, but arguing about very much. And at some point it gets very low. Then tomorrow it gets very high. This conversation and these arguments. So with Azerbaijan, it's, let's say, not perfect relations. The same with Uzbekistan. Even though the presidents meet at least once or twice a year, still the borders are closed. In the city of Dashoguz, which is in the north of Turkmenistan, we had schools, high schools, taught in Uzbek language. We had a newspaper that published in Uzbek language, but they were all shut down in the 90s. And there is a big and very ubiquitous, let's say, policy of nationalism. For instance, Uzbek citizens cannot get higher positions, or when they apply for a passport, they ask the police who issues passports to put Turkmen instead of Uzbek in the nationality part. We still have the nationality part in our passports. And as for the big powers, you said Turkmenistan is a neutral country. Well, neutral country has 5 higher institutions that are related to the military. It's the Police Academy, it's the Academy of National Security, it's the Navy Academy, and 2 others. And with the first president, Turkmenistan was, I think, more leaning toward Russia, because the first president also came from that age, from that period, from the Soviet Union. So Moscow was always a big brother for him. So, and he sold gas at a very cheap price to Putin and to Yeltsin. There was a big scandal with this case when Russia decided to cancel the dual citizenship with Turkmenistan, and in exchange Russia signed a 25-year agreement on gas supply from Turkmenistan at a very low price, when the prices in the world were like almost $100 per cubic meter or something, or 1,000 cubic meters. Turkmenistan sold it at a price of $40. But with the current president, he's not a definite person. It's as I said, Turkmenistan is a very closed society, and such information of internal things, are not displayed, are not told about. You will not read them in the press, for instance. All of the insiders things. But at least to the media and to the world, he tries to be a person, a ruler that satisfies all parties. Turkmenistan has good economic relations with China. The same is with Russia. I think Russia is number one trade partner of Turkmenistan in terms of turnover. And of course the US, we are buying aircraft from the US. We're buying all of the agriculture machinery from the US. And of course all of these talks about the pipelines, the TAPI one and the Trans-Caspian pipeline.
So when you talk about Turkmenistan being a closed society, that doesn't mean that we don't get any information from the people who live there. I mean, we hear about the occasional bad thing happening. There's that old man who gave an interview to a radio station and got sent to psychiatric prison. There are musicians who have been arrested for speaking out of turn. I mean, could you tell us a little bit about both those incidents and then how we can understand things that happen there?
Yes, sure. The man who was sent into a psychiatric clinic is an older activist in his 80s. He lives outside of the capital, and in one day he gave an interview to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the Turkmen service, and then he went to Ashgabat, to the capital, to the Ministry of Interior, to complain about something. And basically then he was sent to the psychiatric clinic. The authorities thought that he was crazy. You know, simple as that. And the second case was about...
I'm sorry to interrupt, because, I mean, it's a mental illness if you think there's something wrong with the regime or with the country?
Yes. We have an article in the criminal code which says if you are showing your disagreement with the policy of the president, then you are a traitor. We have this policy, we have this article, and you get 25 years of imprisonment, or maybe even life, because we have so many dissidents and opposition members who are serving their life terms in prisons.
Oof. And then this other guy, this musician.
Yes, the musician, a very young man, very popular among the youth. He gave an interview to a Turkish music channel, and apparently this was not agreed in advance with the Ministry of Culture or whoever decides this. So I think he even gave this interview in Turkey. But when he came back, he was sent to prison. Of course, there is no official reason of his imprisonment, and this theory is given by human rights defenders. And I have no reason not to believe them, because why otherwise would they make it up? And there was even a video of him giving interview. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it on the internet. I tried looking it up, but it's not available on the internet.
So, it's interesting. You mentioned the number of dissidents, and there are quite a few Turkmeni dissidents. I mean, out in the world, most of them have been either exiled by force or they've chosen to leave because they're afraid of things. I mean, how big is this dissident movement? Is this really like a global push to oppose the regime in Ashgabat?
The dissident community is not very big, and I'm speaking about the dissidents who are openly placing themselves against the government. It's not very big. There are a couple of people in Russia. I think the biggest dissident community lives in Europe and in all parts of Europe, starting from Bulgaria and Austria and the Netherlands. And I think there is a smaller community in the US. But that's, again, it's those people who identified themselves, who said, okay, this is me, this is my name, and I'm opposing the regime, or this is me, and I do the human rights things.
Right.
About Turkmenistan.
And in the grand scheme of things, because Turkmenistan is not a very populous country, it's not a huge amount of people, so the number of dissidents isn't going to be, I guess, overwhelming.
No. As I said, a handful of people, I would say.
Yeah.
And the problem with Turkmen dissidents and with the Turkmen opposition is that they are always fighting among each other. There is no agreement. There is no common policy inside them, and this all is thanks to the Turkmen security services, because they are playing a great role in this disagreement inside the opposition and the dissident community.
They sow discord so that they can't unify and
yeah, they spread different rumors about one another. They tell things. There was a case when a Turkmen journalist from the north of the country was beaten in the street. On the internet was full of stories, let's say, quote unquote, about him having a lover, about him having sexual relationships with his customers who buy honey, because this man apparently produced his own honey. He had a bee garden. So all of these messages on the internet are plentiful, and when ordinary Turks read about, they think, oh, okay, if this is here, then it might be true. Part of it might be true. It's not, in fact. And leaves this bad feeling about the whole thing, the whole opposition, dissident movement.
yeah, and unfortunately, that's common with a lot of repressive governments dealing with dissident movements. Is they try to delegitimize the dissidents. They try to attack them as people. Because they don't have a way of responding to the criticisms of the regime.